Hello. Thank you for having me here at this conference. My name is Kristinn Sigurðsson. I'm head of digital projects and development at the National and University Library of Iceland. I've been working in web archiving for a really long time. And I'm, in addition to my day job, also vice chair of the International Internet Preservation Consortium this year. Today, I want to talk a bit about how the National and University Library of Iceland has built our Icelandic web archive. I'm going to go through the history of it and sort of try and hit the main points, main difficulties, etc. So let's get started. We have a long history of it. We've been doing this a while. It stretches all the way back to the 20th century when the dot-com bubble was rapidly expanding. Things were getting exciting. The initial work was, well, mostly just figuring out how can we possibly do this. We're a very small organization. Even today, we're only like 80 people. There are national libraries whose IT teams are almost 80 people. So we immediately thought, well, let's see what we can find in terms of international cooperation. And initially, we turned to our Nordic neighbors, and we worked in a somewhat on a loose arrangement on developing what was called the Nordic Web Archive, which was supposed to be a tool for displaying data. The reason why we worked on that was because there was this sort of belief that a crawler software called Netlib would actually be suitable for crawling, but we would eventually find out that that wasn't the case. These initial years were fumbling a little bit. Nobody really knew how to do this, and we fortunately did get better as time went on. So in 2002, there was a really big step in Iceland in that we've always had a fairly expansive legal deposit legislation for printed material. In the 70s, it was expanded greatly, and the library became the legal deposit library for music and even things like, once home videos started coming, we started collecting that type of thing. But in 2002, they finally expanded it even further and included electronic media, electronic publications. And this is very early. I mean, I know countries are still struggling to pass similar legislation even today. And we were well ahead of the curve, which was in some ways fortunate because the legislation is fairly straightforward, and it was written to be sort of future compatible. It uses very general terminology. It just talks about any electronic publication on any sort of open network. It doesn't try to limit us or try to sort of lay very firm rules, just saying like, if it's being published, we kind of want it, which is sort of the way we tend to approach legal deposit. Of course, there is also an accompanying regulation that does outline the scope a bit more. And in practice, our national domain .is is sort of the core of everything. It is the focus of our harvesting efforts. And we do work on the basis of this legislation with the registrar for the .is domain, and we get a list of all of the registered domains, which makes our work way easier. It is really hard to do an exhaustive crawl without something like that. But it also, our duties also cover material published outside of .is, notably in .com, obviously. And we have sort of this, we call it Icelandic. So it's anything published by Icelanders in Icelandic or pertaining to Iceland. But that part of our efforts is curated. We have to actually have people make a judgment call and we'll find things. And as you'll see, we have a bit less there. So, but to build a web archive, the first thing we needed was a crawler. As I mentioned, we had been experimenting, and this is actually a bit before my time, with a crawler called Nedlib, but it just didn't scale. It was something built in the late 90s, and the web keeps evolving, and it had clearly become unusable as early as 2002. So an effort was launched, and we, through working with our Nordic partners, entered into yet another consortia called the International Internet Preservation Consortium, which was founded in 2003. And as part of that, my colleague learned that the Internet Archive was building this new crawler called Heritrix. And the Nordic countries ultimately decided to support the development of this crawler by providing engineering resources. One of those resources wound up being me. This is back in 2003, a long time ago, but I got sent to work with the Internet Archive along with a Norwegian colleague, and we helped get the crawler up and running. Main benefit to us, obviously, was that we gained intimate knowledge of this new piece of software, but we also were able to sort of ensure that it had the things that we needed, that it accounted for the needs of our libraries and wasn't just focused on the needs of the Internet Archive. And the Heritrix crawler has been our bedrock. It is the tool that builds our web archive in practice. I've continued to contribute to it when I've had the opportunity and quite frankly the need. Things do come up from time to time where we need something, and in those cases I've usually opened up my country. We don't just build it and just keep it in a lockbox. Whenever possible, we like to share it back to the community and make the crawler better. And fortunately, a lot of other people do the same, which has kept Heritrix chugging along. In terms of those, I would like to mention two things. When we started crawling, we realized that, especially if you want to crawl frequently, you get a lot of redundant data. You're crawling the same videos and images over and over again. And we need deduplication because we wanted to crawl quite frequently in some cases. So a lot of my early work following Heritrix's release in 2004 was to figure out deduplication. And I released a module for Heritrix back in 2005 or 6. And that has since sort of evolved. And we now have a fairly robust deduplication network built into Heritrix and also into the WARC storage format. So it's been baked right into that ISO standard. That was probably not really finalized until like 5 or 6 years ago, but I think it's in very good shape nowadays, and it saves just an immense amount of redundant data, or conversely allows you to crawl much more frequently while storing a similar amount of data. But we're always looking for a little more. So we also have a module for Heritrix that keys off of RSS news feeds and crawls a website based on those feeds in order to get super intense crawling. And for many of our news sites, because we use this, we have a capture. We capture the front page every time we detect a new item in the feed, plus obviously capturing the item itself. And so for many of our news sites, we have like, maybe hundreds even per day. And the front page of our national broadcaster, it's over 130,000 captures over the years, simply because we do this RSS-based crawling very intensively, which has sometimes its other problems because most replay software isn't very good at dealing with those kind of volumes, but it has enabled us to capture almost like a motion picture the changes in just a handful of key websites. Obviously, most websites are more complicated. So our way we crawl at the moment, and this has largely been this way over the years, is we do, like I said, the big full domain crawls. We do them 3 times a year, approximately every 4 months. It's not a very fixed schedule. It depends also a little bit on things that are going on within the library, but about 3 times a year, every circa 4 months. The last one of this year is just about wrapped up. And currently, there are about 80,000 .is domains, and we have another 2,300 URLs that in our, I call it the X outside of Iceland collection. As you can see, there's a big sort of scale difference. A lot of those 80,000 domains are actually garbage. It used to be better. They lowered the price for registering .is domains 10 years ago, and that got us a lot more international hosts and a lot of, well, quite frankly, spammy sites, questionable sites in terms of selling fake watches or steroids or occasionally illegal media. So it used to be, it's actually better if the national domains are a little expensive in terms of just making sure that the chaff isn't there. But each one of those full domain crawls tends to pull in around 80 or 90 million URLs. Obviously, a lot of it is going to be somewhat extraneous. It's going to be crawler traps. It's going to be spam. But we're probably getting most of the good stuff that JavaScript isn't just keeping us away from getting. We crawl quite deep, and we don't have any fixed filters in terms of number of megabytes or number of URLs we get from each domain. We tend to crawl them until manual inspection says, yeah, it's pretty much done. The size we get, it varies a bit, but once we've deduplicated, it tends to wind up around 3 to 4 terabytes, sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more. Deduplication really matters a lot here because there are a few huge sites with like back catalogs of for example, our parliament, which records on video, old speeches, has its video catalog. And that's, that's probably about 10 terabytes, and we tend to pull in again and again and then just discard as duplicates. Whenever they add a big batch, we can see it sometimes a bump. They add it in big batches. So in order to augment this and get a more, capture the ongoing changes, we do have these weekly crawls. They are a curated list of about 80 sites. These are mostly news sites or other sites that we believe are going to change a lot. They're active sites. And when there is some sort of event going on, we will augment that further still with a topical crawl that might have any sort of frequency. We've been doing a COVID capture pretty much. I would like to say we've done it since the thing started, but in truth, we didn't get it up and running until April of last year. We were like 3 weeks behind the lockdown here in Iceland. We're not great at responding to unexpected events for the topical crawl. We were mostly doing the things where we can see it coming, like elections or major sporting events. But we've done the COVID now since then, and we do a daily crawl of just the very most important sites, and we do a weekly of a few others. Sort of blending just into general news at this point, and I don't know how long we'll keep on going. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, we do the RSS. So this was the RSS crawls were in many ways motivated back during the financial collapse, when we realized that as we looked through our web archive, we did not have a capture of any of the news sites when any of the really big stories was on the front page. We actually captured the news items themselves, but we never had the front pages when the news item had broken, that a bank had collapsed or a major speech had been made. Somehow, every time our crawler came to the front page, it was some sort of secondary story that doesn't have that historical import. And I think the RSS crawls were in many ways our effort to have that gap filled, so that when there's the big news item next, we could go in and definitely find when those items hit and how the pages looked and how the news evolved. Of course, today a lot of it actually happens on social media, which we do not capture very well. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, but as most of others who are engaged in this will tell you, social media is really hard, and we have not had the resources to tackle it properly. Access. All right, so here's a topic where we are a little different from many others, because as far as I know, we're the only national full broad scale collection that isn't tied to just government sites or curated list, that is actually open to everyone. So our entire collection is open on our website. You can browse through by URL. We don't have full text index. I'll talk about that a bit later as well. Our legislation is actually quite silent on this topic. It doesn't tell us what we can or can't do. It has there's nothing in the aforementioned legal deposit legislation or other to cover this. So what we decided to do was to adopt what we call the Internet Archive model. That is to say, this is when we crawl public material. And we do crawl a little bit of non-public material, but when we crawl public material, we make it available. Obviously, the handful of non-public material that we are allowed to index is not included. And if any copyright holder contacts us and says, like, I don't want my stuff there, we will just instantly block it. And we have a very low-key process. We make this easy. When we initially opened this up back in 2009, I was worried that we were going to be dealing with these requests quite a lot, but that hasn't been the case at all. We get almost none. I think during the it's been about 12 years that we've had it open, we've gotten like 3 or 4 requests to take down. Plus, we've proactively taken it down a few items where they made the news due to problems with personal data being exposed or something like that. But it's been very little. We are far more likely to be contacted by someone who is upset with us because we didn't archive and make accessible one of their websites. That happens far more often. So we've been quite lucky that in general in Iceland, attitudes towards our efforts are very positive. And I know that's not a universal thing. I think we're fortunate. I sometimes speculate this has to do with the fact that we learn about the Icelandic sagas in school in terms of like how they were nearly lost during the period from the 13th to the 18th century, and then all the efforts that were put in the 18th and 19th century to recover them. We're, I think, keenly aware of the importance of preserving sort of cultural material. And I've never really, and I've heard our colleagues at other libraries talk about, the people being upset with them about doing this or thinking it's a waste of time, but I've never ever gotten that response in Iceland. And I think we're very fortunate that people are very supportive of our efforts. From a technical perspective, we have up until now always relied on some form of the Wayback Machine. Like I said, we started this access in 2009. We started collecting in earnest back in 2004. So, there was that 5-year gap when we had a very dark archive. That wasn't fun. Being able to open it up is really, it helps in so many ways. The initial version was based on early Wayback implementation. We switched that to the open Wayback in 2013 when the International Internet Preservation Consortium, the IIPC, started helping out maintaining that software. More recently, we've been working towards moving to the new playback tool that's all the rage called PyWeb. And we are also using the Outback CDX for indexing, which was developed by the National Library of Australia. And it's been a very big step up. The old open Wayback using flat files that were just very simple. They took up a lot of space. They were difficult to update, and we've been improving our backend a lot. And we're waiting for, so the IIPC is supporting PyWeb, improving in a few ways in order to make it. PyWeb is in many ways better now than Open Wayback, but it's missing a few things that Open Wayback had and a lot of IIPC members use. So the IIPC has been funding some additional work on PyWeb that is just being finished now. They've delivered 2 out of 3 packages. The third package is pretty much done. And once it's done, we're going to move everything to PyWeb, and we already have a beta up, but we will be switching entirely away from OpenWayback. So you probably, if you're starting out, you've probably heard a lot about OpenWayback, but it is sort of like the way things used to be done. And I think PyWeb, if you're looking for an open source solution, is the right solution right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about preservation. I'm not going to go into any deep detail on this, but it's worth talking a little bit about what happens behind the scenes. And I noticed this is the topic that we often don't talk about in sort of the web archiving community. It's general digital preservation. Obviously, we use the ARC and WARC file format. We called in ARC format until 2010. This is the old format developed by the Internet Archive. We haven't converted any of our old data, but unless you have them, you wouldn't want to be making them. The WARC format was developed within the IIPC and is proper ISO standard. Some of our members pushed it into the ISO process, and it has gone through 1 round of revisions recently that I participated in. It is fairly stable. Work continues. We'll probably wind up doing a bit more work on it. There within the IIPC, there is now some talk about various parts. If you're interested, you can contact me. I'll point you in the right directions. But it is a very good standard for holding web material. I don't think I'd want to work with anything else I've seen. You do wind up with an enormous amount of data, though. One of the problems we had with old Netlib was that it sort of just littered it everywhere because it didn't put it into these good, nice arcs, and it was very difficult to deal with. The data volume, though, is such that most of the digital preservation solution we've looked at, they don't really handle it very well. Most of them are tailored towards, like, you're going to be getting a whole bunch of PDFs or something like that. Having the fire hose of a web archive pointed at it is usually not what they're designed for. So we have relied more or less on just having we store the files on disk, and then we have some homebrewed software just to keep track of where everything is, and to coordinate storage. We learned very early on that having a single copy, even if it's in a nice RAID storage area, that 1 copy is no copy, basically. That's very much. So we have always, starting building our web archive, relied on having redundant copies, and we have our internal copy that actually powers our access currently on a 3-part storage solution. And we used to have just another storage solution hosted elsewhere that we would sync with. About 5 years ago, we moved that to just cloud-based storage. So it's a company in Iceland called Endor that hosts the second copy. And it looks like we're probably going to change our contract with them a little bit and only rely on them partially, and also augment the security by having a second cloud provider, which will probably be Amazon Glacier, although we haven't finalized that. So yeah, the rule there is just like lots of copies, keep stuff safe, and a simple management tool just to keep track of where everything is. But this isn't like a proper digital preservation system. The volume of data is just far too great. We're at something like 150 terabytes at the moment, despite our best deduplication efforts, and the growth is somewhat accelerating. So I talked a little bit about this earlier on, but I do think it bears repeating. We just couldn't have done this on our own. We have relied enormously on international cooperation, starting out with the Nordics, and over the last 17, 18 years, it's been the International Internet Preservation Consortium. As I said, we were a founding member. We've been actively involved in working groups projects. We have developed the work standard, and throughout we've been in leadership roles. We've been on the steering committee the whole time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm currently serving as vice chair, and both me and my predecessor have taken on various governing roles within the IIPC. My colleague Thorstein was chair back in 2008, for example. So we've put a lot in, but honestly, for everything that we've put into that community, we've gotten it like 10 times back. It is one of the best investments we've made. By engaging very deeply, we learn so much more than we could just by observing from the outside, and we are sometimes able to make sure that our concerns, which often are a little different, are heard. We are a very small organization, so sometimes our needs, sometimes our focus is a little different from, like, British Library or Library of Congress, these big, that both do great work, but who are just different from us. And I think one of the benefits of having an organization like ours on the steering committee is that we do provide a breadth of viewpoints. So this is, I think, really a key point, and I would encourage anybody who's starting out in this to engage with our community as deeply as they can, because that is one of the quickest ways of bringing some of this knowledge in. There is a lot of knowledge within that community, and that can be tapped. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we are looking at going forward. We have, as I mentioned, the problem of the JavaScript-driven sites, the social media being the most notable example. We have not had a great deal of luck with it. And I don't know how well we're going to. If there's any way out of it, it's probably through our cooperation, the engineering resources to deal with it, or just a human to do it very manually, are just far too great. There are some efforts ongoing within the IIPC that we're very excited about, but it would just make a huge difference if we could capture sort of the social discourse that's happening within social media. It is annoying to know that sort of a very important part of the conversation is happening in an area that is, technically public, but it's just not possible for us to archive it, and we were sort of keenly aware that is a hole in our archive that's just going to become more and more noticeable. Right now, what happens on social media is somewhat part of the cultural consciousness, but researchers looking back from 50 years are going to be very conscious of that hole that they will not have any immediate context for. We've also been looking at better cataloging. We tend to do this. Most of our collection are very automated. We don't do a lot of QAing. We don't do a lot of cataloging of what we capture. This requires just too much effort. Probably the total amount of effort we put into web archiving, including my time and all of it, it doesn't amount to a full-time equivalent. It's probably closer to like 75%. So it's just doing this intensive cataloging, which can often improve the user experience quite a lot. It is something we would like. But we really need some automated tools. And recently, there was a very interesting tool called Dark and Stormy Archives. And I don't know if that's going to be what we use, but we're really looking towards automated tools. And again, that's something we hope we develop in the community, and we can perhaps just support through being beta testers, like we have been for PyWeb, or taking on a more modest role, because we can't lead that sort of development. You may also be asking about full text indexing. We've tried it. It's again, it's a topic that is sort of a little bit beyond us, so we haven't tackled it. So those are some of the things that we are looking to working on in the future. Thank you. If any of this is of interest and you would like to talk to me or discuss it, you can reach out through our IIPC websites. Thank you very much.